Welcome to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and this is going to be a recap of the 8th day of the NAL 2022 season stage number 2. So the penultimate playday of the stage, and a lot of the games here go a long way toward determining how the final playday will look. And really what that means is that everything, almost everything going on in the final playday is going to be extremely important. At the end of playday number 8, again this playday, only one team is secured for the major and only 2 teams are locked out of going to the major. So that leaves 7 teams vying for 3 remaining spots. They will all be determined over the course of one single playday, 5 games. And okay, so let's talk about how we got there. Day number 7, the playday before this, seemed like maybe we were winding down the stage and that we might start just getting more expected results based on the storylines that had built up over the first 2/3 or so of the stage up to playday 6. Playday 7 was, I think, unsurprising. It was a rather easy day to predict overall. If you were making reasonable predictions, you probably got 4 or 5 of them correct. And so going into this day, if you just made the normal predictions, continuing with the trend, that it was not the case. This first game, though, was an unsurprising result, but it came from a very surprising game. 8-6 victory for Astralis. Beast Coast very nearly won this game, and we'll look at the round breakdown on this one. So we're playing on Villa, and the way this game went, starting at the beginning, so Astralis gets the first 2 rounds, and then I want to say maybe it was just after those 2 rounds that Beast Coast called their timeouts, and they sort of adapt to what was going on, and they end up going 3-3 on the half, and Villa still is one of the more defender-sided maps, so maybe 3-3 on your defensive half isn't great, but then Beast Coast rockets off to an amazing start on their attacking half. They get 3 rounds in a row. They're already up on the match point, 6-3, and now it is Astralis' turn to adapt to what Beast Coast is doing on their attack. So then we see 3 rounds in a row from Astralis, and then even 2 more rounds. 5 rounds in a row for Astralis to close out the game. They do end up losing the 1 point because they went to overtime, but they do get the victory over Beast Coast, which I think was pretty well the expected result. Looking at the community prediction, yeah, almost 90%. So this would have been a pretty big surprise to see Beast Coast win. And again, probably not a 90 versus 10 type of surprise, but I understand why the community predicted this way. Okay, looking at the stats, it's actually Drip on top here, followed by Surf and Sweater not having as good of a game, but I guess in terms of just like raw KD, nobody doing especially bad in this game on Beast Coast, except for Slashug. Obviously, pretty big disparity, I suppose, in the entry, with Beast Coast going -4 and Astralis going +4, with all of that positive differential being concentrated on DP Fire. Very impressive game from him, only +1 in the KD, but the massive entry stat is, well, massive and a very good cost to boot. Shuttle and Force and Janano sort of in the middle, and then Iconic not doing especially well. 9-9 is fine, I suppose. Not doing really that bad. But you have to wonder maybe if Iconic played a little bit better, maybe they could have won this game in regulation. And I guess maybe if Slashug or anybody on Beast Coast had played a little bit better, that maybe Beast Coast could have closed this game out 7-3, 7-4, or even 7-5. And right, so that was the first game of the day. Again, I think the only expected result. I think all of the other ones were pretty surprising. So let's go to talk about the rest of them. Second game of the day was Dark Zero versus XSET, and I think XSET had looked quite a bit better than Dark Zero over the course of the stage. XSET maybe a little bit inconsistent, but Dark Zero very inconsistent, with some impressive results like in their games against Beast Coast and Parabellum, but also some disappointments like their game against SSG, and all of this after they just won the most recent major. XSET also appearing at that major, maybe falling a little bit short. They had that whole situation with their coach, and that continued into the stage, but they now have their other coach with them, standing behind them on stage, so maybe that is helping them, but obviously not enough in this game. They do fall. 7-5 victory for Dark Zero. Play on Clubhouse, not the most common map these days, but I generally tend to enjoy seeing Clubhouse. Maybe that is because it is one of the more rare maps to see. Only 30% of voters in favor of Dark Zero. I mean, I think it makes sense. I do think XSET was maybe not the massive favorites. I think it was realistic to think Dark Zero would win this game, but yeah, I do think XSET worthy some amount favorites going into it. Good game coming out from Diaz and Gomez, and then a really bad game coming out from Spirits. He didn't get a kill up until round, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9. It was quite a while that he had no kills, and then only ending up on 4 is pretty brutal. He's had some insane games this stage, and then a few really terrible games, this one obviously included. And then another good game coming out from NJR. I think he had the highest rating in their previous game, but not that they're previous game was especially spectacular, but nonetheless, 2 games in a row where NJR is on top. Do like to see it. I think he's a very phenomenal player, and he got off to a really bad start to this stage. And then Pamazoo and Eclipse, and then Canadian Hyper not doing as well, but again, it is enough to secure them the full 3 points, which they really, really needed. And so this is one of the many results today that is going to go a long way toward making the final day as exciting as it is. XSET was above Dark Zero, and this puts Dark Zero in a position where they do have a chance to go to the major, and XSET has a better chance. I think there's several teams on 12 points, and I think both of these included, right? But with XSET, I think having the best round differential out of all of them. So I think if they just win their game in regulation in the final day, XSET will go to the major, and not very good shot otherwise. And then Dark Zero, TSM, Space Station, all of them are they also need to basically win in regulation, but it also depends on the results of other games. Okay, so let's take a look at another game. Game number 3. And here it is, Oxygen versus Space Station. One of the biggest upsets of the day, but not the biggest by any means. We'll get to that one in a little bit. Yeah, there was 7 points dividing these two teams coming into the games. Only 9 points for Space Station, 16 for Oxygen. And Oxygen, not really a lot to play for in this game. They could have locked in their spot for the major, but they were basically already guaranteed. And by the end of the day, because of the other results, they would be guaranteed anyways. So, right, you know, not really playing for too much. You could make it easier for yourselves to actually get first place, and they still have a great shot to get first place. Even if they get no points in the last day, they could still get first place. But if they get, I don't know, like 1 or 2 points, they're guaranteed first. So I don't think they're sweating it too much, and Space Station had everything to play for. They basically needed the full 3 points here, and they also need the full 3 points in their final game, which is against Astralis, if they want to go to the major. They can still go on like 2, maybe even 1 point. I don't quite remember. But yeah, they basically need 3 points to go, and yeah, they basically just get it done. If they lost even a single more round, it would have put them in a really, really bad position. But because they only lost the 5 rounds and still got the full 3 points, their hopes of going to the Berlin major stay alive. We play on Oregon, and I think it's a map that each of these teams likes a good bit. Community prediction 85% in favor of Oxygen, and this was one of the games I considered going with the underdog, which was Space Station, because again, they had so much more to play for than their opponents. And I think Space Station, I don't quite recall what their record was last year versus Oxygen. It must have been 2-1. I want to say maybe Oxygen won in stage number 1, and then Space Station won in the other 2 stages. And then in the most recent game that they played just last stage, that was also a Space Station victory, Space Station being one of the only 2 teams to beat Oxygen last stage. So for all of these reasons, I thought maybe Space Station, I don't know, I mean, I guess I regret it now, but I think still Oxygen was a reasonable choice. But, you know, maybe 85% is a little bit slightly unreasonable. Finally, Vertical on top, and nobody else having an especially good game. Newers on the bottom. A lot of people are pretty quick to point out the fact that SSG banned Finka against, specifically against Newers in this game, and he didn't do especially well. But also, keep in mind, the very first game that they played this stage, Oxygen, that is, they banned Finka against, well, you know, against themselves, obviously, but against Parabellum, and Newers still went 17-10 in that game. I think playing Zofia, and it was on Theme Park, different map, different opponent, whatever. But I think people that are really quick to point out the fact that Newers went negative without Finka, they're failing to remember the fact that this isn't the first time he hasn't had the Finka this stage, and he did quite well in the other game. Really brutal game from him, especially on the entry, and I guess SSG comes out on top for the entry. They're +2 overall, and Rampy and Bosco really popping off. They're 2, I think maybe they're just straight up 2 lowest rated players coming into this game, and this I think equalizes things quite a bit, especially with, I think Hot and Cold was still their top rated player, and then again with these 2 being the bottom rated players, all of their players are pretty closely rated at the moment, which is nice to see. And maybe it'll even be closer after the last day, but one way or another, they will or won't be going to the major, so I don't think their closest of stats will be any sort of consolation for them. And yeah, I guess that does it for this game. Again, a pretty big surpriser, and a pretty significant in gumming up the standings even further. And again, we'll look at the standings and whatever at the end, but just to continue to point out the trend. Okay, let's go on to the 4th game. Parabellum versus TSM, and a 7-3 victory for Parabellum, I do think is a little bit surprising, and I think just a Parabellum victory in general, not the most surprising thing. I'd say TSM was the favorite coming into this, but again, 7-3 is a pretty dominant scoreline. We haven't seen any We haven't seen too many massive beatdowns. I think we've seen a few 7-1s, and I think those were both against Mirage, and we've seen maybe a few 7-2s and then a handful of 7-3s. So not too many super dominant scorelines. We'll see the stats in a minute. Another Villa game. So this is this what, only the second one of the day and the fourth one between yesterday and today, and we'll even have one more Villa game for the final day. So half of the games in play days 7 and 8 were on Villa. So I did mention it must have been in the predictions video when I talked about this. I wasn't sure if Parabellum's fraggers were going to be able to fully fire against TSM, a team of pretty much all gunners. Of course, they are on whatever roles, but they're all gunners in their own right. So, say Geo and Inshallah are support players, but they can certainly shoot back. And I guess wasn't really the case. Parabellum was able to keep up, and yeah, so I guess let's go look at the stats so I can show you guys what I mean. Only about a quarter of the voters in favor of Parabellum, maybe a little bit harsh, but yeah, TSM was the favorite, and also just they get extra votes and they're TSM. So yeah, looking at the stats, Gunner and Blaz doing quite well, as they often have, and then Kool-Aid another pretty good game. He's had several pretty good games, especially this one, and I guess the game just before this. The highest rated player on his team against Mirage, going I think 11-1, so he's 22-6 between that game and this game. Very impressive. The entry is insane. Everyone going positive, every single player. That's almost unheard of. They only lose one single entry duel, so they go, I guess this must be what, 9-1. Like those are insane entry stats. Parabellum is just really gunning for that major spot, and I think they're in second place, I think, at the end of this day. Oxygen on 16 and then them on 14. They play against Sonics, and the winner of that game will go to the major. The loser of that game still could go to the major, and we'll talk about that stuff in a video. That might be tomorrow's video. I'm going to go over a bunch of the possibilities and whatnot for who can and will and whatever go to the major under what circumstances. And then looking at TSM, yeah, everybody negative rating, everybody negative on KD, everybody negative on entry. Yeah, just two impressive performances from Parabellum coming out in a row, and one was against Mirage, sure, but this one's against TSM, and TSM was looking like one of, if not just the best team in the league early on in the stage, and now I don't know, they've lost quite a few games. Their only recent victory is that one over Space Station, and that was even an overtime win. So quite a precarious position TSM finds themselves in, and they do not have their fate in their own hands. Even if they get a win in regulation in the final day, that still doesn't guarantee them to go to the major, and I think they're the least likely to go, if I remember right, of the teams that can still go. So, okay, I think that does it here. We'll go to the final game. And here it is, the final game of the day and the biggest shock of the day. Mirage defeats Sonics. It may have been a little bit more surprising if this had been Mirage's first one of the stage. They did get a win over Beast Coast, but still, I think by all accounts, this was very surprising. Sonics had looked quite good, and they were actually playing to lock in a major spot in this game. They can still go to the major if they beat Parabellum in the next playday. They are going. Even if they lose, they have a chance. But, right, they really would have loved to have locked it in here, and I guess it's more exciting for the audience that they didn't, and good for Mirage, and I mean good for everyone else in the league besides Sonics, everyone else that was still looking for a major spot. But yeah, just a really weird result, and I think ultimately what it just comes down to is the fact that Sonics were playing for everything. They're playing for a major spot, and Mirage is playing for nothing. They can't get out of last place, let alone go to the major. So yeah, just a big disparity in pressure. I guess Mirage maybe chokes under pressure a little bit, and they excel when they don't have any, and Sonics in this case did choke a little bit under the pressure. We play on Villa, of course, the third time for the day, the fifth time for the week, and the prediction, 96% in favor of the opponent of Mirage is pretty standard. Looking at the stats, Nightmare Nyx on top, in Nyx We Trust was the hashtag going around, and yeah, pretty much everyone in the league was rooting for Mirage, obviously other than Sonics, because if Mirage get the win here, then anybody else vying for a spot still has a much better shot. Sonics would have guaranteed occupied one of those spots, and now they are not guaranteed occupying one of those spots. And so it could have been Parabellum and Sonics, and I think it can still be both Parabellum and Sonics, but whichever team wins will go, and whichever team loses may go. So we'll have to see what goes on there. Yeah, looking at the stats beyond Nyx, Marmalade and Benji having a pretty good game. Melted and Kento not having terrible games by any account. Whereas on the other hand, everybody on Sonics having a really poor game except for obviously Grixer. And Grixer is very close to taking over that top spot from Newers. I think he's only like 0.04 in terms of rating behind him. So it's entirely possible that Grixer will end up in that #1 spot. And yeah, what more can you say? Just bad stats led to losing the game, and what led to those bad stats? Again, it probably just was the massive differential in the pressure. I don't think Sonics are a bad Villa team by any means, and I think Mirage like it a decent bit, and that is why we are playing here. And I mean, I guess not too much to say about it besides what I've already said. So I guess we'll go look at the stats. We'll probably just stick to the leaderboards in the interest of time, and then we'll take a glance at the standings. Okay, here are the stats leaderboards as of playday number 8 having concluded. Grixer now on top of the KD, Newers on top of the rating, the other one on the second position for either of these categories, and then Gunner, Yaga, and Foxay occupying the other 3 spots. And yeah, you'll notice the KD really just correlates to the top rated players. For entry, we have Rexon on top and then Gunner just below. These 2 players will be going head to head in the final playday, and then there's even a pretty big gap between those 2 and the rest of the players. You'll notice Sonics players occupying a lot of these categories. We have 4 of the 5 Sonics players in the top 2 of at least one of these categories. So we see 2 Grixers, and then we see Rex in here, Cans in here, and Super here. So that's cool to see. And then going on to cost, we have Foxay, Blaz, and Geo leading the way, with Laxing and Diaz a little bit behind. Clutches, I guess Surf is just the clutchingest player in the league. I don't especially remember too many of his clutches. They probably were smaller clutches, as you know, the majority of clutches are 1v1s, 1v2s, or whatever. But he does have 5 pretty impressive. Kansan, Hot and Cold, Kino, and Geo, the other top clutchers. And then planters, we have Bosco and Super, Kool-Aid, Drip, and Dream. And Bosco and Super, 5 of each of their plants actually came in the game that they played against each other. So if you actually subtract those, then all these 3 players at least would take over their top spot. 5 plants per each of them in that game was pretty wild. And you know, I guess that'll do it here. I don't really want to go through the full stats. Video's already probably getting kind of long, so we'll just go to the standings and then we'll call it a day. And here they are, the standings after playday number 8. I'll read them down the line from 1st through 10th. We have Oxygen, Parabellum, Sonics, Astralis, XSET, Dark Zero, Space Station, TSM, Beast Coast, and Mirage. And there are things I could talk about here, the possibilities for the matchups, for the results and whatever, for the final day, but I have, of course, another video in mind in which we'll talk about those, and even, you know, we still have predictions to do for that, so I don't really want to go into that. You can see what's going on here, the matchups we do have to play. I guess I'll just tell you really quickly. TSM versus Beast Coast, Mirage versus Dark Zero, Oxygen versus XSET, Space Station versus Astralis, and Sonics versus Parabellum. All of them matter. Beast Coast and Mirage aren't playing to go to the major. Mirage isn't really even playing for anything. Beast Coast can move up the standings but not go to the major. Oxygen can lock in first place, and then those other 7 teams, they are still fighting to potentially secure a spot. So yeah, I think this could be the biggest playday we've seen in any region, in any stage ever, like in just terms of how many things are going to happen and how many possibilities there are. So definitely be sure to tune in, and well, there is certainly more coverage before then coming out from me, so stay tuned for that sort of thing if you are interested. A comment, a like, a subscription, any of the stuff would be appreciated. And with all of that being said, I will catch you guys in the next video.